وهو العزيز الحكيم. صدق الله العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وربنا زدنا علما آمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها مولاها. أما بعد. We will continue on the chapter of Khaybar, and today we will briefly talk about some of the negotiations that the Prophet ﷺ made with the Jews of the different fortresses in Khaybar. And to recap, Khaybar was a constant source of trouble for the Muslims because Khaybar was a place that one of the Jewish tribes that had been expelled from Medina had taken refuge, and these were people that were always launching political intrigue and machinations against the Muslims, always trying to incite the Arabs, the Bedouin Arabs, to attack Medina. So these were the kind of people that if you left them on their own, they were somebody who would start wars against the Muslims. So Rasulullah took it upon himself to remove this threat, and that's why the attack on Khaybar was launched. And where we had left off last was that the Prophet said he had a flag of the Muslims, and he said, tomorrow I will give the flag to somebody whom Allah and His Messenger love. Allah will give us victory through His hands, and he's not one of those who turns back in flight. Now this flag was given to Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Ali ibn Abi Talib was not even there that day when the Prophet made that announcement. And what had happened is that Ali had a problem with his eye, like an infection, and he was left behind in Medina while the rest of the Muslims went out to Khaybar. And then after the Muslims left, Ali was like, I feel awful staying behind. So he went after the army, even though he had that trouble with his eye, and he found the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, you left me behind, and the army went off without me. And the Prophet said, aren't you happy that I entrusted you to be left behind with the people the way Musa ﷺ had entrusted Harun to be his ambassador, to be somebody who was his representative. And the Prophet ﷺ does a little miracle, and Ali's eye was healed by way of that miracle. The story of Khaybar also tells us something very interesting, that it was one of the incidences where Ali demonstrated his physical strength. Now later on, after the Prophet ﷺ would pass away, and Ali would later on become the Khalifa, one of the people, the historians who described Ali, said that if you look at Imam Ali, between his two shoulders, he had the muscles of a lion. I mean, he was that well built, his upper body was that well developed, and he was somebody who spent a lot of time drawing water. Water can be very heavy, drawing water out of wells and carrying it, and this was a means of labor that he used to do. So Ali was physically very strong, and during these battles of Khaybar, there was one time where there was the gate of one of the forts that had fallen, and it was impossible for 7 Sahaba to be able to pick it up, and Ali ibn Abi Talib was able to pick up that gate. And according to some people, that the weight of that gate was 900 kilograms. That's almost 2,000 pounds. And 7 people couldn't lift it, and Ali was able to lift it. So his physical strength is attested to, and Khaybar was one of the times when he demonstrated that. Now, one of the forts of Khaybar was a fort called Zubayr, and it was a fort that the Jews were able to withstand the siege of the Prophet ﷺ. And it became, the Muslims were wondering how they were able to hold off for so long, and then one of the defectors from one of the other forts came and said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to negotiate terms with you, but I want to make sure that me and my family will be safe, and my property will be safe. And when the Prophet agreed to that, this Jew told the Prophet that under this fort was a little river. So they have this constant supply of water, and that's why they're able to hold out. So when the Muslims found out about it, they were able to block that passage of water. When the passage of water was blocked, then the Yahud opened up their fort, and there was fighting, and it was 3 days of savage fighting, but then the Muslims were able to defeat them. That was the fort of Zubayr. It's called the citadel of Zubayr. The next fort was one of the last forts, and it was probably the most powerful one, and this was the fort of Tamus. And in the fort of Tamus were where many of the Nadir who had all that money that they had left with Medina from were in that fort. And so Rasulullah attacked the fort, and they also held out for about 2 weeks. And then their chief, whose name was Kinana, he sent word that we wish to negotiate. We want to make a truce with the Prophet ﷺ, because they knew that Prophet ﷺ, whenever you proposed something to him, he would always lean toward the way of mercy. So he made a deal with the Prophet ﷺ that you will let all of us know, even the men who were engaged in fighting, who would otherwise be executed according to the rules of war. He said all of us should be allowed to go, the women, the children, the men, and in return, we can have all of our property, we can have all of our wealth. So Rasulullah went ahead and agreed to that, and he called Abu Bakr and Umar and Ali and Zubayr to be, and 2 of the Jews to be witnesses to the agreement. When Rasulullah asked the Jews about that wealth, Kinana, their leader, said, yeah, we spent all of that wealth. We don't have any of it because we spent it to buy weapons to fight against you. And Rasulullah believed him, and then later on, some of the Jews that were there, they did not believe in the Prophet as a prophet, but they went to Kinana and he said, don't lie to him. He is somebody that we don't need to believe in, but this is somebody who he will eventually find out what you have done. And Kinana and the Jews had hidden all of that wealth. And so when the wealth was discovered, the Prophet ﷺ found out about the wealth, then Kinana was executed, because those were the terms that he himself had agreed to, and the families were, just his family was made captive, everybody else was subjected to the original terms. After the fall of this greatest fort of Tamus, there were smaller fortresses where when the Jews heard about how Rasulullah was making deals with people and they were announcing truces and the Prophet was accepting the truce, they came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Ya Rasulullah, we need to make a truce, we're not going to fight like the other Jews fought. And the agreement that they wanted to make is that we would do sharecropping for you. And what that was is that Rasulullah would take property on all of their land, and they said, we will work on the land for you, because the Jews had the know-how of the land. The Arabs did not know as much. So they said, and the harvest that is produced of the land, we will give you half, because you now own the land, and we will keep half. And Rasulullah also agreed to that. And Rasulullah said that if we choose to go against this agreement, then we have the right to do so and expel you. And they said, yes, that's fine. So the Jews of these fortresses continued to work on their land, and they were able to keep half of their land. Keep in mind that Rasulullah could have done anything that he wanted to do. He didn't have to take their agreements, but he went ahead and accepted it. And from these lands was a small piece of land called Fadak that came into the personal property, that fell into the personal property of the Prophet ﷺ. And this Fadak you will hear about later after the Prophet passes away, because Fatima radiallahu anha had a claim to this land. And Abu Bakr, who was Amir al-Mu'mineen, his opinion was otherwise. But this property of Fadak came to the Prophet ﷺ during this campaign of Khaybar. Inshallah, we're going to pause here. There's more and continue from this point next week. Jazakumullahu khair. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala rasulil kareem. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.